There is one mistake the galaxy has learned never to make. It is not a strategic mistake. It is not a mistake of weapons, numbers, or position. It is a smaller thing than that, a quieter thing. You do not take a human's child. The empire that learned this lesson had been taking children for 900 years. Not as cruelty, they would have told you that, if you'd asked, as commerce, as science, as the simple, efficient harvesting of specimens from the small frontier worlds that no one important would ever miss. They were very good at it. They were, in fact, the best in the known galaxy. And they had been the best for so long that they no longer thought of it as a skill at all, the way you do not think of breathing. They had taken children from 400 species across 900 years, and they had a number for everything. They knew how long each species mourned, down to the day. They knew the precise shape of grief in over 1,000 cultures, which species wailed, which went silent, which built monuments, which turned and walked back into their lives as though a door had quietly closed. They knew that a taken child was, in every measurable sense, a closed matter, because in 900 years, across 400 species, not one parent had ever come. Grief fades. That was the law they built their empire on. The first law, the load-bearing one. Grief always fades. And then, on a small green world at the edge of nothing, on an ordinary morning, they took a human girl named Yuki. She was 6 years old. She had a gap where her front tooth had come out the week before, and she would not stop pushing her tongue through it. She had been chasing a beetle through the tall grass behind her mother's greenhouse when the collection skiff came down out of the morning light, silent, the way they always came. The overseer who took her did not even note her name. There was no field on the manifest for names. There was a field for species, and a field for estimated value, and a field for world of origin, and he filled them in the way he had filled them 10,000 times, and he gave the order to lift, and the skiff rose back into the light, and the green world fell away below them, and that was all. He did make one note, almost as an afterthought, because the protocol required an assessment of any potential pursuit risk from the originating world. He noted the child's mother, non-combatant, he wrote, no threat. He would think about that note later, for a very long time. Her name was Sarah, and by every assessment the Empire ran, she was harmless. This is the part they would study the longest. Afterward, the part where the data, 900 years of flawless, predictive, load-bearing data, had quietly and completely failed them, and no one had noticed until it was far too late. Sarah was a botanist. She had come to the frontier colony to grow things, to coax old earth crops into stubborn alien soil so the settlement could feed itself through the long dark winters. She was 34 years old. She was soft-spoken, the kind of quiet that people sometimes mistook for shyness and sometimes for serenity, and were usually wrong about both. She kept bees. She had a bad knee from a fall years before, and she walked with the faintest limp when the weather turned cold. When the Empire's analysts later pulled her file from the colony records, and they did pull it, eventually, frantically, looking for the variable they had missed, they found nothing that should have worried them. No combat history, no augmentation, no allies of note, a gardener, a widow, a mother. They classified her exactly as they had classified 10,000 grieving parents before her. Non-combatant, low threat, will mourn, will recover, will remain. They were right about the first word. Sarah was not a soldier. She had never held a weapon in her life. She did not know how to fight, or track, or kill, or survive in the dark between the stars. They were wrong about every word that came after. That last morning, before any of it, Yuki had not wanted to eat her breakfast. This is the kind of thing Sarah would remember later with a clarity that felt like a blade, that the last ordinary moment of her old life had been a small, stupid argument about porridge. Yuki had wanted to go outside and find the beetle she'd seen the day before, the big iridescent one, and Sarah had said times, after you eat, and Yuki had eaten 3 bites and announced she was full in the way that 6-year-olds announce things as immutable law, and Sarah had laughed and let her go. "Go on then," she'd said. "Don't go past the fence line." And Yuki had run out into the tall grass with her tongue pushing through the gap in her teeth, and that was the last time Sarah saw her for 9 months. She came home from the far greenhouse around midday, with dirt on her hands and a basket of cuttings, and she called Yuki's name, and Yuki did not answer. She called again. She walked the fence line. She found the beetle, the big iridescent one, crushed flat in the matted grass where something heavy and round had set down and lifted off again. She found one small shoe. She did not scream. The other colonists, the ones who came running when they realized, all said the same thing afterward, in the same hushed voice. She didn't scream. She stood very still for a long moment, holding the shoe in both hands, looking at the flattened circle in the grass and the empty sky above it. And then she went very, very quiet. What she did next, she did without raising her voice once. She sold the greenhouse, the one she had spent 4 years building, that fed half the colony. She sold the house. She sold everything she owned that could be turned into passage off that world. And when it was not enough, she worked and traded and bartered and did things she would never speak about afterward, until she had bought herself a single cramped berth on a freighter heading inward, along the route the collection skiffs were known to run. The Colony Council tried to stop her, gently, kindly. They sat her down and told her what everyone knew, that the collectors were an empire, that they spanned 100 systems, that they were old and vast and untouchable, and that a single woman with no training and no map and no fleet could not possibly reach them. That she would die out there in the dark, alone, for nothing, and that Yuki would not even know. Sarah listened to all of it. She let them finish. She thanked them sincerely for their concern. Then she said the only thing she would say again and again to everyone who tried to turn her back for the long years that followed. "She's my daughter," as if that settled it, because to Sarah, it did. It settled everything. It was not a reason among other reasons. It was the only reason there had ever been or would ever be. Far away, aboard a collection vessel that had already forgotten the green world entirely, Overseer Vale received a routine flag from the Empire's monitoring systems. A single human vessel had been logged following the skiff route inward, low priority. He glanced at it, saw the automated assessment times non-combatant, projected to abandon pursuit within 4 weeks' times, and dismissed it without a second thought. The models gave her 4 weeks. 4 weeks passed. Sarah did not turn back. She had reached the first way station on the route, a vast, lawless sprawl of a thing, 100 docking rings stacked into the dark, where 1,000 species bought and sold and vanished, where the Empire's writ was a rumor and the only law was leverage. She had never seen anything like it. She did not speak the languages. She did not know the customs, the dangers, the unwritten rules that everyone else seemed born knowing. She was a small, soft creature from a small, soft world, alone, in a place built to swallow such creatures whole and never notice the swallowing. She learned the way humans learn when the alternative is unthinkable, fast, and without rest, and without the luxury of fear. She learned which docks the collectors used and which manifests to read and which signs meant a ship had come inward along the right route. She learned which beings could be paid for information and which would take her money and sell her location the moment her back was turned, and which would simply take everything she had and leave her in the dark. She learned all of this the hard way, because there was no other way, and she paid for every lesson, and she kept going. She was robbed in the second month, everything, all of it, the little she had left. A 3-limbed dock runner who'd promised her passage and taken her credits and her bag and her coat and left her with nothing. She did not weep. She found work hauling cargo on the night cycle, 16 hours at a stretch, until she had enough to move one system further inward. Then she did it again and again. She went hungry. She slept in maintenance crawl spaces, folded around the warmth of the conduit pipes. She ate what she could find or afford, which was not much, and her clothes hung off her, and the limp in her bad knee grew worse in the cold of the stations. And she kept going, inward, always inward, following the thread of her daughter through the dark like a woman following a single light across a country with no roads. There was a night, deep in the 4th month, on a freezing transit station, when an old creature who had watched her come and go for weeks sat down across from her and offered her a way out, not cruelly, with something that was almost gentleness. It told her, slowly and carefully of its kind, that it had seen many griefs in its long life, and that the ones who survived their grief were always the ones who learned, in the end, to set the dead down. It offered her work, a place to stay, a way to stop. It told her, not unkindly, that the child was almost certainly beyond any reach now, and that there was no shame, none at all, in laying down a weight that had grown too heavy to carry. It meant every word of it as mercy. Sarah listened to all of it, the way she listened to everyone, and then she said very quietly that her daughter was not dead, and that even if she were, she would still go, because going had stopped being a thing she decided to do a long time ago. It was simply what she was now, the way a river is not deciding to reach the sea. The old creature looked at her for a long moment, and then it did something it had not done in many years. It gave her its own coat and the name of a captain who would carry her further inward, and it asked for nothing at all in return. It only said as she rose to go, "I have never met your kind before tonight. Now I think I understand why the old ones leave you alone." By the 3rd month, the model that had given her 4 weeks had been quietly retired. Overseer Vale noticed her again at 16 weeks, when the flag came back across his desk a second time, escalated now, marked for review. He frowned at it. He pulled the full record, not the automated summary, the times, full times record, the tracking, the station logs, the path she'd cut. A human female, the same one, still following the route. Now 4 systems deep into territory where no grieving parent had ever set foot, because no grieving parent had ever, in 900 years, wanted to badly enough to learn how to get there. He ran the assessment again, by hand this time. The system insisted she was a non-combatant, no weapons, no allies, no fleet, nothing. Then why, he thought, looking at the line she had drawn across the dark, is she still coming? He did what his people always did when the data confused them. He consulted the deep records, 900 years of them. He searched for precedent. Any species, anywhere, in all that time, whose parents had pursued a taken child even half this far. The search returned nothing, not a smaller number. Nothing. In 900 years of taking children from 400 species, no parent had ever come even close to this distance. The data simply ended, far behind where this one small human woman now stood, looking inward, toward them. Vale sat with that for a long while. Then he flagged her vessel for direct observation, and for the first time in his long and decorated career, he felt something move in him that he did not have a clean word for. Here is the thing about Sarah's walk, and the Empire would come to call it exactly that, the walk, the way you give a name to a thing you cannot otherwise hold. She was not unstoppable because she was strong. She was the opposite of strong. She was one exhausted woman with a limp and a photograph of a gap-toothed girl, and she was being ground down to almost nothing by the dark. She was unstoppable because she did not contain anywhere inside her the thing that lets a person stop. And as she went deeper, something began to happen that frightened the Empire more than any fleet ever had. The ones she met along the way began to times help times her. Not all of them, but some, and not the ones you would expect, hardened things. Scarred mercenaries and smugglers and dock bosses, Beings who had seen everything the galaxy could do to a person and felt precisely nothing about any of it. Some of times them times helped her. A dockmaster who looked at her papers and looked at her face and quietly waved her through a checkpoint she had no right to pass. A freighter captain, a great armored slab of a being who had killed for less than she was carrying, who took her 3 systems inward for free and would not say why, and would not meet her eyes when he let her off, except that when he did, for just a moment, his eyes were wet. None of them could quite explain it. There was something about the small, ruined human woman who would not stop walking toward her child, something that reached into species with no children of their own, no concept of the bond, no word for what she was doing, and moved a thing in them that they did not know they had. One of them, a hauler captain who'd carried her 2 systems, asked her about it. Late, in a long, dark transit, over the bad station liquor she couldn't really afford to share. Why? The captain wanted to know. You will not reach them. You know this. And even if you did, you are one, and they are an empire. Why do you not stop? Every creature stops. Sarah looked at the captain for a long time. When she finally answered, her voice was very quiet. My people have a thing we say. We say a mother would walk into the sea for her child. We say it like it's a figure of speech. She turned the cup in her hands. It isn't. There's no sea I wouldn't walk into. There's no dark I wouldn't cross. You keep asking me why I don't stop, and I keep trying to find the place inside me where the stopping is supposed to be, and it just isn't there. It was never there. I think you're looking for a kind of person who decides to be brave. I'm not that. I'm just a person who can't put her child down. The captain did not have anything to say to that. The captain carried her 1 extra system past the agreed stop and never asked for payment and never spoke of it again. The legend started in the underworld and climbed. The human who won't stop. By the time it reached the Empire's high chambers, it had stopped being a curiosity and become a question that no one could answer, and the Empire did not like questions it could not answer. Historically, in the long memory of the galaxy, questions powerful things could not answer had been precisely how powerful things ended. So they made an offer, through intermediaries, in the careful, deniable way of vast institutions that have begun very slightly to be afraid. They would return the child quietly. No admission, no apology. Simply, here is your daughter, and please, please turn around and go home. And here is the thing that should have warned them, the thing that finally made Overseer Vale understand exactly what his empire had reached. It was no longer about the offer, because by then a question had taken root in the Empire's own mind that the return of 1 child could no longer uproot. They had to, times no. They had built 900 years on a single load-bearing law. Times grief fades, threats disperse, parents stop times. And 1 soft-spoken human woman with a bad knee and an empty stomach was, day by day, system by system, proving that law false in front of the whole galaxy. And if that 1 law was false for humans, then every assumption built on top of it might be false too. The whole structure trembled. So before they returned the girl, they sent an envoy to meet Sarah, to ask her the question directly. The same kind of question another tired alien had once asked another unbreakable human in a white room a long time before. Why? The envoy asked her. You cannot fight us. You have always known this. We are offering freely to give her back. So why did you not simply wait in comfort on your own world? Why did you not grieve and recover and remain like every parent of every species before you? Why would you walk into death for a thing you could not change? And Sarah, who had not slept a full night in 9 months, who had buried her whole life and crossed half the dark on nothing but will and an empty stomach, looked at the envoy and did not understand the question. Truly did not. She turned it over and over and could find no place to hold it. Finally, she said, She's my daughter. There is no too far. There is no too long. There is no distance I would not cross and no thing I would not go to cross it. You think I am walking toward her because I am brave. I am not brave. I simply cannot do anything else. She is mine, and she is out there in the dark, and so I walk." She paused. She looked at the envoy with something that was almost terribly pity. "And you should understand something before you let me go thinking it ends with me. If my body failed out here, and it nearly has, more than once her father would walk. He's a quiet man. He'd come anyway. And if he failed, her grandmother would walk, and she is 81 years old, and she would come, and she would not stop either. And when she failed, there would be cousins, neighbors, strangers who never met the girl but heard the story. You did not take a child from a woman. Her voice did not rise. You took a child from a species, and we are all still walking." The envoy returned to the high chambers and reported, word for word, what it had heard. And for the first time in 900 years, the chambers were silent. They gave Yuki back. There was no battle. There was no siege. There was nothing at all that the Empire's vast and ancient machinery of war was built to handle, because the thing that had come for them could not be fought, only ended, and they had finally fully understood that they could not end it. You cannot kill your way free of a thing that does not stop coming, a thing that breeds more of itself out of grief, a thing that an entire species takes up in turn, hand to hand, torch passed to torch, across the dark, forever. Overseer Vale himself brought the girl to the meeting. He had insisted on it over the objections of his superiors, who would have preferred to send a functionary and keep their distance from the thing they had stirred. But Vale needed to see her. He needed to see, with his own eyes, the woman who had unmade 900 years of certainty with nothing but her feet and her refusal to put her child down. He expected, he admitted later in his report, a monster, a force, something that matched the size of the legend, some grim, hardened thing forged by the journey into a weapon. He found a small, exhausted human woman, thin to the bone, with gray threaded suddenly through her hair that had not been there 9 months before, who fell to her knees the instant the airlock cycled open, and held out both her arms, and made a sound he had no translation for. A sound that was grief and joy and 9 months of held breath all at once, breaking open. And a 6-year-old girl with a gap in her teeth crossed the deck at a dead run and slammed into her, and the woman folded around the child and did not let go. Vale stood very still and watched a mother hold her daughter. He watched her run her hands over the girl, over and over and over her face, her hair, her shoulders, her hands checking, memorizing, confirming, as though she could not yet trust that the dark had given her back. He watched her weep without shame or restraint in front of the beings who had taken everything from her, because in that moment they were nothing to her at all. They were not even there. There was only the child. And Overseer Vale understood, finally and completely, the mistake his empire had made. They had thought human love was like the love they knew, a thing of degree, a thing with edges and limits, a thing that grief, given enough time, wore patiently down to nothing. They had built their numbers on it. Grief fades, but a human's love for her child was not a feeling that could fade. Vale saw that now, watching her. It was not a feeling at all, not in the way they had measured feelings. It was a time's direction. It did not weaken with distance. It did not erode with time. It did not negotiate or weigh costs or recognize the word time's impossible. It did not break because it was not the kind of thing that breaks. It was the kind of thing that simply continues in this generation and the next, for as long as there are humans, which is to say, as near to forever as the galaxy ever needs to worry about. You could take anything from a human, Vale wrote in his report that night, and he wrote it slowly, choosing each word, their world, their freedom, their lives. A human will endure those losses the way all thinking creatures do. They will grieve and recover and remain. We were not wrong about that. We were only wrong about the one thing. Their children. For a human's child, no grief fades, no distance holds, no force stops them, and no cost turns them back. They do not have enough. They have only a direction, and they will walk it until the stars themselves go out. The Empire issued a directive that same cycle. It was very short. It did not explain itself, because the beings who wrote it could barely explain it to themselves. It read, in full, human worlds are not to be approached. Human young are not to be taken. Not for science, not for commerce, not for any reason, by any vessel, ever again. This directive is permanent and is not subject to review. And in the long years that followed, as the directive spread quietly from empire to empire, the way a warning spreads, the way the buffer of void had spread once before around other worlds, the galaxy had learned the hard way to leave alone, the collectors found other species to harvest, and the galaxy rearranged itself the way it always does, carefully, around a thing it could not fight, and had decided, wisely, never to provoke again. If you are human and you are listening to this, here is what I want you to understand. Somewhere out there in chambers older than your civilization, in the records of an empire that spans 100 suns, there is a directive that no one is permitted to repeal. And there is a story, passed quietly between species that fear almost nothing else in all the dark, about the day they learned why it had to be written. It is not a story about weapons. It is not a story about fleets or fire, or the things the galaxy usually means when it speaks of the powerful. It is a story about a tired woman with a bad knee who lost her daughter to the most powerful thing in the galaxy, and who simply began to walk and did not stop, and would never have stopped, because the thing inside her that they were counting on to make her stop does not exist in us. They thought grief fades, and it does. We let it fade for most things. We are good at surviving loss better than almost anything alive. We bury our dead, and we carry them, and we keep going. That is one kind of human, and it is most of us, most of the time. But there is another kind, and the galaxy has met her now, and it will never, ever forget her. She is the one who comes for her child. She does not have a limit. She does not have a distance. She does not have a times too far, or a times too long, or a times too strong to fight. She has only a direction. And if you are ever tired and small, and the thing you love is far away in the dark, and every voice around you is telling you kindly that you cannot possibly reach it, remember that an empire of 100 worlds, after 900 years of perfect certainty, looked at one human mother walking toward her daughter through the dark and blinked first. Keep walking. That is the whole story.